Hello and welcome to our webinar on the analysis of alternatives and tools to support the substitution of biocides. I'm Adam Elwan and I will be your moderator today. So to get us started, these are some of the things you can expect to hear about today. Our presenters will be talking about all the support material and tools that are available to help you assess your alternatives. They'll also be giving more specific advice and case studies, as well as talk about what challenges you can expect so that you're better equipped to overcome them. You can ask questions from the experts that have joined us today, so do make use of that opportunity. More about the Q&A on the next slide. You can send us your questions throughout the event by going to slido.com and using the event code AOABIO. The questions will be answered during the live Q&A. Now you can also upvote questions in Slido by giving it a thumbs up, and I recommend using this feature so that we cover those questions that are most relevant for you. If you have a question directly to one of the speakers, please add their name when typing your question so that we know who should answer it. Now we can only cover questions within the scope of the webinar. That said, if you do have questions that are not directly related to the topic, you can still send them to us using our contact form at eca.europa.eu/contact. We will be publishing a Q&A with answers to all the questions we receive. If your question is not answered by the time we close, you'll find your answer in the published Q&A. The presentations for this webinar are already published and you can find them on our website. The video recording will also be available right after the webinar ends on the event page. As mentioned before, we will reply to all the questions you send us today, those that we have time for during the live Q&A, and the rest in a Q&A document coming soon after the event. So here's the program for today. After my introduction, Denis Motet from ECA will talk about our support for analyzing alternatives, including guidance and online training. Michaela Clever from the German Federal Institute for Occupational Safety and Health will then present Subsport. Subsport is a database with potential alternatives, case studies, and good practice for successful substitution. Then, Stephanie Wieck from the German Environment Agency will talk more about analyzing non-chemical alternatives and their challenges. We also have a case study from Bob Vermeent, representing the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. His presentation is on field testing alternatives to biocidal anti-fouling paints. The last presenter today is Jonathan Kleimark from the International Chemical Secretariat. He will be talking about their marketplace, which is a service where companies can find safer alternatives to hazardous chemicals. All right, it's time to give the floor to our first presenter, Denis Motet on ECA's guidance and other support material.
Hello, I am Denis Motet, Scientific Officer at the European Chemicals Agency. Today I will introduce the new ECA framework guidance on analysis of alternatives to biocidal active substances. The biocidal products regulation refers to the substitution principle for the most hazardous biocidal substances. They are the so-called substances candidate for substitution. For these substances, the availability of suitable alternatives should be assessed. This is particularly important for the approval process of substances meeting the exclusion criteria. For these ones, the availability of alternatives is a key consideration for the derogation conditions under Article 5.2 of the BPR. There has been an increasing focus and expectations regarding the quality of the analysis of alternatives for several years. For this reason, ECA has developed a framework guidance and a reporting template to help applicants making an analysis of alternatives of good quality. But the guidance can also be used by authorities if they wish to make their own analysis. We foresee a gradual implementation of the guidance. First, dossier of active substances meeting the exclusion criteria submitted after the 1st of March 2024. In a second time, dossier submitted after the 1st of March 2025 for substances which are candidates for substitution but not meeting the exclusion criteria. Check these documents and the implementation note. You can access them by clicking on the links in this presentation. The approach taken in this guidance is very similar to the one described in the REACH application for authorization guidance. It includes a description of the substance function and uses, the actions taken for searching alternatives, including the involvement of stakeholders, which is a very important step, the list of alternatives taken forward for a deeper assessment, and the actual assessment and conclusions, which includes the risk reduction potential, the technical and economic feasibility, and availability criteria. We are well aware of the several challenges related to analysis of alternatives for biocides at the active substance level, like the lack of knowledge on the uses, the potentially high number of these uses, the lack of information on alternatives, etc. So, we advise you to prepare early and search broadly for information. Investigate inside and outside your supply chain. Search for scientific and technical literature. Calling on specialized consultants can be very helpful. Look at dedicated websites and so on. We underline as well the importance of including non-chemical alternatives in your assessment. There is a growing offer in this field, and these should be properly considered. In summary, as an applicant, prepare an analysis of alternatives according to the guidance and template. Justify why your analysis, the approach taken, the information sources, the criteria of the evaluation you chose, and your conclusions. Submit your analysis according to the implementation timeline. Include a non-confidential version, which should be as transparent as possible. ECHA will then publish this non-confidential version on its website. This will be done at the stage of the third parties consultation made according to Article 10.3 of the BPR. During this consultation, the participation of stakeholders is key to collect additional insight on the alternatives. To help you searching for alternatives and analyzing them, ECHA has published a series of training modules that we invite you to go through. This training is not specific to biocides, but is relevant for all substitution projects of chemical substances. You can watch the videos on our official YouTube channel, EU Chemicals. You can also benefit from a more complete learning experience, free of charge, by registering to our e-learning platform. Check also ECHA substitution web pages, which contain a lot of information. You have all the links here. To conclude, there is an increased focus on alternatives under the biocidal products regulation. We published a new guidance and template to help you. Please use them. Start early for having an assessment of the alternatives of good quality. Search broadly for information on uses and alternatives. And prepare a non-confidential version of your analysis that ECHA can publish. With this, we wish you a successful search for alternatives, paving the way for non-regrettable substitution. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michaela Klever. I'm a scientific advisor at the German Federal Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the BIUA. A warm welcome to today's talk on the information platform SubSpot Plus within ECHA's seminar on alternative assessment and tools to support substitution. In the next 10 minutes, I will give you a short overview how SubSpot Plus can be used as a tool to support substitution and help to find and search information on alternatives. Subsport Plus stands for Substitution Support Portal, and the BIUA uses it as a tool to collect and disseminate information on substitution, for example, within the case stories. It aims to assist with substitution by giving an overview on methods and tools to support with the process of substitution. The portal was relaunched at the end of 2020, and it's not only a passive portal, but also aims to build a network with stakeholders and experts to exchange knowledge on available alternatives and how to do substitution best. In the portal, you will find information on 5 different topics: regulation, substances, cases, process, and good practice. The plus in Subsport Plus comes with the topic good practice. In there, we actually interact and collaborate with initiatives on national level, but also on the EU level, like the Roadmap on Carcinogens, to summarize guidelines for safe handling, especially for substances which cannot be substituted at the moment. Subsport Plus offers 2 major databases. Here under substances, the database list of lists, or formerly called the database on restricted and priority substances, which contains more than 37,000 entries. Today, I'm going to talk about the database of case stories, which contains a large collection of examples from the practice on how substitution can be done. On the subpage Cases, you can find the database of case stories, which contains more than 460 case stories, which are examples from industry or come from studies and reports, but are also summarized from literature. Subsport Plus offers these case stories bilingual, so many of the case stories are in English. About 80 of them are translated in German. We continuously update the database of case stories, but also extend it. As you can see here, from 2020 to 2022, we already added 13 new case stories. Before adding an alternative to the database of case stories, we recheck the alternative with the Subsport Plus methodology, which I also will explain later on. The database is searchable. You can enter the substance identifiers like EC, CAS number, or even the substance name, and you can filter the results according to sector, function, or process. And the results you will see a short summary, an abstract of the case story, which gives you an overview if this might be an interesting case story, and then you can enter the case story and look for further information. In general, what kind of information on alternatives can you find on Subsport Plus? In the subpage Cases, there's not only the case story database, but also the methodology is explained on the case stories, how alternatives are selected for the case story database. And we also offer more information on alternatives like the case studies, which are alternatives assessments on groups of substances, and give you also further information if you are not able to find the information you require on Subsport Plus. So coming back to the methodology on Subsport Plus, here on this slide, I summarized the exclusion criteria for the alternatives, which are not qualifying to be regarded as an alternatives in the case story database. So you can see here the CMR substances, very persistent or very bioaccumulative and toxic substances, endocrine disruptors, neurotoxic substances, and sensitizing substances should not qualify as an alternative for a case story. So for today's talk, I've searched the database on case stories on biocides. And the first 5 examples which are found here are, you can see, range from preservatives to disinfectants. And the experts among the auditorium, I think, can easily correlate these biocides to the correct product types of the biocidal product regulation. What kind of information do you actually find in the case story? So there are different kinds of information. Of course, you find information on the substitution candidate as well as on the alternative regarding function, process, product category, and what kind of application. The typical substance identifiers and, if available, information on the harmonized classification. But the main part is the description of the case. So besides the abstract, you also get the motivation why substitution has been done, besides the hazardous properties which wants to be substituted. There are also the advantages and disadvantages displayed of the alternative, and, for example, other information like the state of implementation. If available, also the information the supplier or producer is given, or the literature source. As I mentioned before, we also have information on the case studies, which are reports on substance groups which contain alternative assessments, and these studies originate from a project from 2010 to 2013. We have many different case studies, for example, on bisphenol A, nonylphenol, or parabens, which can be found in the database of case stories or under the subpage cases. More recent reports and studies are available as well, for example, on chromium trioxide, reports which Bauer has conducted, or OECD reports on PFAS. If you do not find any hits, or if you cannot get any information from SubSpot Plus, we collected an overview of other sources, for example, ChemSec Marketplace or the OECD SART Toolbox, where you can find other methods or even information on alternatives. And just what I mentioned before at the beginning, we also have workshops on certain topics, and the BIUA also conducts studies or commissioned studies on certain topics, as, for example, here, the survey on alternatives for in-kind preservatives for varnishes, paints, and adhesives, which was published in 2020. And in connection with that, we had a workshop in 2021 with experts and stakeholders. So everyone who's interested can look up the report or the workshop documentation on our website. So I hope I could give you an overview on what SubSpot Plus can offer you in finding alternatives in the databases. And just to give you an outlook, what will happen in future development. Of course, as I mentioned, we're continuously updating and extending our database. And we are not only looking for substance alternatives, but also for technical alternatives or functional alternatives, and want to integrate new concepts of safety and sustainability by design for future challenges of substitution. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I invite you to visit SubSpot Plus if you have information on case stories which can inspire others to use this solution. Please get into contact with us.
Hi, my name is Stefanie Wieck, and I'm working at the German Environment Agency in the unit that is responsible for the environmental risk assessment of biocides. With this short presentation, I would like to present to you what we think is necessary to support the substitution of non-chemical alternatives to biocides. As a start, I would like to have a look at what we think would be necessary to achieve a sustainable control of harmful organisms. At the core of this, we need to manage biocides. So risk assessment, management, enforcement, and monitoring are the core to achieve this goal. However, managing biocides is, from our point of view, not enough to achieve a sustainable use of biocidal products. To reach the minimum necessary that is already requested in the biocidal products regulation, we need to look at other options that include alternatives and preventive measures for harmful organisms. So today's about substitution. So looking at what we think is important regarding substitution is that we need to consider 3 different levels on this. So first, we can substitute biocidal active substances with other biocidal active substances. This would be the lowest substitution level and would provide the least options. The next level of substitution would be a substitution on product level, so replacing biocidal products with non-chemical alternatives. And this is what we're here for today. But there's also more. So if we take into account functional substitution by Tickner, we could also substitute the use of biocidal products by preventive measures against harmful organisms. So from our point of view, this is a very important topic we need to consider as well. If we still need to use biocidal products, we need to optimize their use to the best extent possible. And this can be achieved by several different aspects. I won't go into the details today, but we think all of these are very important as well to focus on. And to work on all of these different topics, we at the German Environment Agency founded the SCOTTI initiative, which is the short abbreviation for Sustainable Control of Harmful Organisms in the 21st Century. So the projects we're working on is the substitution with non-chemical alternatives, amongst many others. So we work on efficacy testing and the assessment of alternatives, but also on new management concepts for harmful organisms, on the testing of devices for the application of biocides regarding their drift, on chemical alternatives, on stakeholder involvement, and also on public relations. So all of these projects can be found on our website if you're interested in these aspects, but today I will talk about the testing and assessment of alternatives. And what we see is a mismatch between biocidal products and non-chemical alternatives. Because as we all know, biocidal products are evaluated to a great extent, while this is not done for the alternatives. So we have no independent evaluation of these alternatives regarding their efficacy, their humaneness, and their effects on non-target organisms. And this information is very important, on the one hand, for the users that might want to use these alternatives if they are proven to be efficacious and humane, and also for us as authorities, because if we want to recommend alternatives, we need to know something about them. So one example for the advantages we can see with assessed non-chemical alternatives is this study where the humaneness of different methods to control rodents was assessed. And what we can see is that the snap traps, the number 3, provide much less suffering to the target rodents than the currently mainly used anticoagulant rodenticides. So what we think is very important is the further development of the testing of alternatives, and this is where we invest a lot of our resources into. So, for example, we developed an efficacy and humaneness test for rodent snap traps, the so-called Nocero initiative you might already have heard upon. And we implement the testing of non-chemical alternatives in the listing according to the German Infection Protection Act. And in this autumn, we will start to develop an efficacy test for the thermal control of surface fouling organisms as a potential alternative in PT2. Another aspect we work upon is the establishment of eco-labels. In Germany, that's the Blue Angel for non-biocidal alternatives. And we've already established quite a few eco-labels, also considering efficacy issues within the criteria. So if we want information on these non-chemical alternatives, we are in the situation that biocidal products are quite easy to find if you want to use one, because there are databases, there are national databases on all the authorized biocidal products. There's the ECHA database, but there's nothing similar for the alternatives. So there's not this one-stop shop to find information on these alternatives. You need to do quite an extensive internet search. The problem that we as an authority have is that we cannot recommend products if we don't have transparent criteria for this recommendation. And so the workaround that we use is that we try to establish those criteria, for example, the NOCERO guidance, and embed those criteria in existing structures such as the German Infection Protection Act or our eco-label, the Blue Angel. We've gathered this information on existing certified alternatives on our homepage. You can find the link here, and provide information in English for the consideration of these alternatives during the assessment of alternatives in comparative assessments. And we also provide the information in German, because in Germany, according to the Ordinance on Hazardous Substances, there needs to be a substitution assessment where we try to help with this kind of information. This is how it looks like. On the right, you can find all the substitution options we provide in English and, as I said before, also in German. However, we see the problem that these offers are on the one hand limited by the existence of certification schemes. As I said before, we're working to establish criteria and implement these criteria in existing schemes, but it's quite an extensive workload, and we can't do this at once for all. But there's also the problem that it's limited by the will of the producers to use these schemes. So we need, of course, producers wanting to certify under these schemes. And what we hope is that the stronger consideration of alternatives in substitution procedures will enhance the interest of producers, first to develop innovative alternatives, and then also to certify these under the schemes. So the key messages I would like you to take home with is first that a sustainable management of harmful organisms is much more than just using non-chemical alternatives, but non-chemical alternatives are a very important component of a sustainable management. The spread of non-chemical alternatives is, from our point of view, obstructed especially by missing knowledge. For the users of, or potential users of non-chemical alternatives, they need to know that these alternatives exist, so we need a place where they can find condensed information on this, and also information on their efficacy, so that not everyone has to test by themselves whether this works or not. And also for us as authorities, these points are very important to know, as well as information on the humaneness of the alternatives. While we have to say that the same holds true for biocidal products, where we miss knowledge on humaneness sometimes. And we also need to know more about the effects of non-target organisms by these alternatives. As I said before, for us, a suitable solution for these problems would be an independent certification of alternatives to improve the situation and foster the use of non-chemical alternatives. And with this, I would like to end. Thank you all for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the questions afterwards.
Hello, welcome to this presentation about the field testing of alternatives to biocidal antifouling paints in a member state, in this case the Netherlands, where I also work at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands. So in this presentation, I will walk you through a field test we did on anti-fouling products and alternative anti-fouling products. Secondly, on an alternative anti-fouling campaign. And then thirdly, I want to tell you something about the lessons learned. What has this given us? But first, what is anti-fouling? Anti-fouling products are paint films that act as a release vehicle for active substances contained in the paints, and they create a microlayer of biocide-rich water at the paint surface. And this paint surface then deters the settlement and/or growth of fouling organisms. And here in the picture, you see what happens when fouling organisms know where to find your boat, and when you lift the boat above the water. So what did we do? In Rotterdam in 2018, there was a symposium, and one of the topics discussed was anti-fouling. And it was found that in general, there was not a lot of public acceptance to the alternatives that are present to the conventional anti-fouling products. And most of this was due to a lack of data regarding the effectiveness of the anti-fouling products. So we were wondering, is this bias? Things like it doesn't work or it's costly, is that bias? Or is there actually a problem with the alternatives that they don't work? So we wanted to test this. Which is why the Dutch ministry funded a collaborative effort to actually test available alternatives. This was done in cooperation with a marine industry association, an environmental communication organization called Milieu Centraal, and a public-private partnership organization for water recreation. The testing itself was conducted by a third party. Something about the methods for this field test. For this field test, suppliers were engaged. They could provide their own products which were to be tested. In the end, there were 12 tested products, of which 11 were biocide-free and 1 was copper-free. Also, a conventional product was tested, and then the alternatives and the conventional products were compared. This was done at 2 test locations, both in saltwater and in freshwater. So some of the results. For freshwater, it was found that alternatives actually had the same performance as the conventional biocide. For saltwater, the results were somewhat mixed. Some had the same performance as the conventional biocide, others performed less. It should also be noted that also the conventional biocide performed somewhat lower in the salty water environment. However, we found that it was actually easier to clean the surfaces that were treated with some of the alternatives than the conventional biocide. So in general, the results were quite positive. Alternatives to conventional biocidal products were available and actually had similar performance. So that paved the way for a next step, which was raising awareness by means of a campaign. So this brings me to the second subject, the information campaign that we conducted afterwards, after the field test, to increase the awareness of the presence of alternatives to anti-fouling products and other ways to actually reduce the use of anti-fouling products, also non-chemical means. This again was a collaborative effort. And communicated, amongst others, the results of the field test, but also was a bit broader. And it is a continuous effort. It still goes on online, but also offline, for example, by means of stands on symposia. One of the products in this information campaign was an infographic. You can still find it online. It's in Dutch, but I will walk you through. So here we see an overview of different anti-fouling products, but also of means to actually avoid fouling by means of non-chemical ways, of which the most obvious one perhaps is to actually have your boat not in the water, but on land, and then nothing can grow on it either. So the different options are compared for the pressure on the environment, the effectiveness, both for salty water and for fresh water, how long the product will last, whether you can apply it yourself or need professional help, and the average costs per year, or an indication therefore. So what has this given us? We do see that there's a higher awareness of presence of alternatives, especially among young people who own a boat. However, we don't see a lot of behavioral change. Opinions like it's costly, the effectiveness might be too low, or there might be hurdles in application, they still prevail. And therefore, we also don't really see a significant increase in the sales of alternatives. So something about the role of the Dutch government. We helped facilitating and enabling the chain collaboration. But, well, like I said before, we don't really see a behavioral change yet. So the honest question to ask here is whether additional steering efforts are required. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
My name is Jonathan Klemark and I represent Chemsec. And today I will talk about the Chemsec Marketplace, which is an online platform, business to business, for safer alternatives. But first, just briefly on what Chemsec is and what we're trying to do. So Chemsec is a Swedish NGO. We are working on chemicals. So our aim is to reduce the use of hazardous chemicals, especially within consumer products. And we do that in a few different ways. We drive the political discussion on hazardous chemicals, which means that we do advocacy work for making sure that politicians are aware about the chemicals issue. We also challenge companies to improve their chemicals management, because we believe that when we can talk to policymakers about successful companies that have a progressive chemicals management, that is very, very powerful. And we want to show these positive examples from the business world to the policymakers, because we know that that's a message that will make change easier. But apart from that, we also want to facilitate for companies that want to change to safe alternatives. So we have developed a set of online tools to help companies in this transition. And one of them is the Chemsec Marketplace, which I will talk about today. And a final part of our work is about investors, where we try to inform investors about the risks and opportunities within the chemicals industry. What is a potentially a good business and what is a bad business for chemical production. And the tools that I mentioned, we have several of them. Today I will just go over 4 of them briefly here. So the SIN list is our tool for, or our list of chemicals that should be banned. It's the chemicals that, according to us, fulfill the SVHC criteria and should not be used. And as the other side of the coin, we have the Chemsec Marketplace, where we present the safer alternatives to these chemicals on the SIN list that should not be used. And apart from that, we also have ChemScore, which is a tool where we rank chemical producers, mainly according to their portfolio of hazardous chemicals, but also on transparency issues and circularity issues. And this, of course, is then a tool for investors to use in understanding what is the risks and benefits for different companies within the chemical production area. And our newest tool is called PFAS Guide, and that's a way to support companies in understanding if they might have potential PFAS uses within their products. But today, I will focus on Chemsec Marketplace. So Marketplace is a global business-to-business platform where you can find safer alternatives to hazardous chemicals. So the idea we have is to make sure that there is a specific site where you can find safer alternatives. If you're looking for a specific use, or if you want to phase out a specific family of substances, you can find the alternatives on that website. So our aim is, of course, then to increase the availability of alternatives. And we want to provide access to alternative providers because they usually need a way to support their push to penetrate the market. And we want to do that by offering a direct connection to the supplier on the site to facilitate the connection between the supplier and the buyer. And we also want to facilitate substitution because we want companies to get better understanding on the availability and also the viability of potential alternatives. So on Marketplace, we are working with contact. As I said, we want to make sure that the supplier and the buyer can contact each other on site to initiate a substitution work. So our focus is to make sure that connection is done, that the buyer can understand the viability and the availability of different alternatives, and the supplier can answer the questions and can connect to the buyers on site. So that is sort of our part of the substitution work. Then, of course, there is a lot more to that process in order to understand if a specific alternative is viable for a specific use. But our part is sort of the initial availability and viability check. But then, of course, with talking about safer alternatives, we need to understand what is safer and we need to understand what is an alternative. So starting with an alternative, we consider an alternative that comes from any supplier offering a solution that can either replace or remove the use of a hazardous chemical. And we, of course, welcome different types of alternatives, both drop-in substitutions, new technological solutions, new processes and materials. And we're also focusing on bio-based materials because we think this is an important part of how we can transition the market to more sustainable alternatives. So all of these are considered alternatives from the ChemSec point of view. But of course, then talking about what is safer, what is a safer alternative, we have set up a set of criteria that the products advertised on Marketplace need to fulfill. So briefly, it's no substances on the candidate list, no substances on the sin list, of course, no CMR, no substances fulfilling PBT, VPVB, or PMT criteria in REACH, and also no EDCs. Apart from this, we also have some other criteria, but these are the major criteria we need all the products on Marketplace to fulfill in order for us to consider them safer alternatives. But if you're an alternative provider, what kind of information do we need from you in order to understand if it's a safer alternative for Marketplace or not? So the information necessary for submitting an ad to Marketplace is not that many. So we need, of course, the function and the different uses of that alternative. We need a short description of the alternative, what kind of chemistry it is, for example. It's always very important for us to understand if there are some standards or some third-party verifications connected to the product. And we need the hazard information. Whatever is possible on that scale, we need to see that so we can verify if it's a safe alternative or not. So what do we then do and how we assess this alternative? So when we get the submitted new ad, the first step that we do is to verify the information, to go through the SDS or technical data sheet or whatever information we have received in order to check that. We then do a hazard assessment to understand, are there any hazard properties connected to this product or this alternative? And does that hazard assessment or does that hazard profile make sure that it is not fit for Marketplace, or if it's a fit for Marketplace? In many cases, this hazard assessment needs to be connected to more information from the supplier. In some cases, for example, with CBI, we need a statement from the provider that they fulfill our criteria if we cannot get all of that information. Then we also spend some extra amount of time on the replacement info to make sure that all the uses and function that this specific alternative can replace is on the ad, because we think that's very important. And then after that, we can publish the ad on the Marketplace site in order for other people to view the information. So some numbers regarding Marketplace. So we today have 634 ads, and those ads are of two different types. So we have the evaluated alternatives, where you can make the direct connection to the supplier on site.
But we also have the alternatives, which are only called alternatives, where we do not have the connection, but you get information regarding the alternative, what it can replace and what it cannot replace. On Marketplace today, 2 contacts are made per day between a buyer and supplier. We have around 3,000 users per month, and we have around 4,000 ad page views per month, meaning that there are 4,000 views of the different ads from different users per month. And regarding interest, I would say that there are some categories that are more interesting than others. We have historically has the DVRs or the DWRs, the durable water repellency alternatives have been very interesting for the crowd. But apart from that, we're now looking at the PFAS alternatives. We have added a lot of PFAS alternatives lately. They are also very interesting, both from point of view of our audience, but also on a regulatory scale. So we see a lot of interest in PFAS alternatives, and we're also looking into how we can add even more PFAS alternatives to the website. So what are the next steps? Alternatives to persistent substances, as I said, both PM substances and PFAS substances will be added to, or alternatives to this will be added to the ChemSec Marketplace. And we will also connect it more firmly to the upcoming restrictions from the restriction roadmap. What alternatives do we have to those substances? And they will be added to Marketplace. And this is a continuous work that we will keep doing over time to make sure that we have as many alternatives as possible. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening, and I'm happy to receive or answer any questions regarding this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all our presenters. It's now time to conclude the webinar before we start the live Q&A. As Denis explained, there is increasing focus on the need to properly assess alternatives under the biocidal products regulation. And this is especially true for the most hazardous biocidal substances that are candidates for substitution. An important point here is to prevent so-called regrettable substitution. So this can be, for example, replacing a hazardous chemical with an even more harmful one. To avoid regrettable substitution, make sure you prepare a good quality assessment of potential alternatives. Remember to involve your supply chain and other stakeholders in your assessment. This will help you to get a better understanding of the uses of your substances and potential alternatives. As you heard from our speakers today, also non-chemical alternatives should be considered. Getting ahead of regulation and doing your assessment of alternatives early can save you time and money in the long run. Now, all this can be a daunting task, and it takes many levels of assessment. Important considerations will also need to be made that can all impact your business. That's why national authorities, agencies like ours, and non-governmental organizations are producing support material, case studies, and tools to find alternatives more easily. So there are resources at your disposal, and hopefully this webinar has helped you to learn more about them and how you can make use of them in your own work. Now it's time to start our live Q&A panel. You can send us questions through Slido using the QR code on this slide, or by going to slido.com and using the event code AOABio. The live Q&A is until 4:30 Helsinki time, after which we will end the webinar. As mentioned earlier, we will publish a Q&A with answers to all the questions soon. The Q&A is about to start. Welcome to the live Q&A. With us are the speakers from today, so we'll just get to know them again. We have Denis Motet, also from ECHA. We have Michaela Klever from the German Federal Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Then we have Stephanie Wieck from the German Environment Agency. We have Mr. Bob Vermeent from the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, as well as Jonathan Kleimark from ChemSec. Thank you all for joining us. Before we start the Q&A, here are a few practical details just to remind you. So please do keep sending your questions in Slido until we close. So that's 4:30 Helsinki time, 3:30 CET. We'll be doing our best to answer and get through all the questions that we receive. But those that we don't have time to cover in the live panel, if that would be the case, will then be answered in a Q&A chat, Q&A document, sorry, that will be published on our website soon. So let's get started. We have a question here from downstream users. So do downstream users have a role to play in the analysis of alternatives and substitution? Looking around the table, who would like to take this one? Bob? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can say something about this. Well, one of the lessons learned in the field test that was performed here in the Netherlands was that if you want to adopt a safe by design approach, then an intensive interaction between all the different parties in the supply chain is really important, especially because you want to identify as many options as possible. And this also requires well, demands from the end users or downstream parties in the supply chain. And in this way, you also identify and might be able to tackle some challenges that are associated with the innovation system on which the new alternative should function. And then you can think about prevailing norms or regulations, perhaps of values or even things like perceptions. So yeah, I think that downstream parties are important if you want to find a good alternative, yes.
All right, thank you, Bob.
Yeah, I can say a few words as well, Adam.
Yes, please.
Complement a bit Bob's intervention. Yes, downstream users are absolutely key in providing information on alternatives and searching for alternatives. I mean, first of all, they can, as users or formulators of biocidal products, they can inform their suppliers, their active substance suppliers, about how they use the substance and what works, what works less well, what is important for them, so that these guys can identify really what could be the solution for potential alternatives in there. And also, of course, they have a crucial role in searching themselves for alternatives. Downstream users can also perform their own analysis of alternatives. They can search around and see what is on the market and move towards these safer alternatives. So downstream users are definitely key actors in this process. Yeah.
Yeah, I would, if I may, I would like to add to this because I also agree that the end users of the products are playing a key role in bringing alternatives on the ground and using them, because they are the ones that have to take the decision in the end, what is the proper use of a biocidal product, because you have to take into account alternatives and preventive measures when you're trying to manage harmful organisms. So it's very important that they are very well informed and trained on alternatives as well, not only on biocidal products. So yeah, I agree that they play a key role.
All right, thank you very much. Then moving on, we have a question about BPR, so biocidal products regulation processes. The person is saying that they are not innovation friendly. Companies with alternative technologies have, quote, extreme difficulty in even finding a competent authority who could evaluate new chemistries. And they're asking, when will we see an innovation friendly system? Who would like to go first?
I guess I can say something about that. Yes, we know that this is clearly a challenge. I mean, for the whole biocides approval substance process. I mean, there is a lot of backlog. There is a lot of workload for the member states and so on. So we are fully aware of that. So we don't have immediate solutions to that, but this is a well-known issue, and I mean the authorities are making their best in resolving the backlog and allowing therefore innovation in this field. And I guess yeah, everything will be done for future improvement of the process on this. So yeah.
And if I may add, I see possibilities to foster innovation with regards to non-chemical alternatives and also to products falling under the simplified authorization procedure in national legislations, where we can, like, for example, exclude them from self-service prohibitions, for example, or advertisement restrictions. So there are possibilities within the member states to foster some of the alternatives.
All right, thanks a lot, Stephanie. I don't see any other hands going up, so we'll move on to the next one. This is specifically for Subsport Plus and ChemSec Marketplace. And the question is, how do you actually assess non-chemical alternatives in these platforms?
I can start, maybe. So for Subsport, actually, we have a methodology at the moment to assess the chemical alternatives, but not so far the non-chemical alternatives, so the functional alternatives. So we are still working on this, but actually we are also kind of dependent on the opinions from the users. So we need the feedback, how well the alternatives work and how well they actually are able to substitute and bring the technical performance needed. So yeah, we try to promote several or give the indication where chemical alternatives can be used, but we still need the feedback from the users here to say that they really work.
And then from my side regarding ChemSec Marketplace, I mean, from ChemSec point of view, everything that removes the use of hazardous chemical is a safer alternative. And I think if we're looking at the non-chemical alternatives, of course, for us, that's equally important. I think it's important to state again that we have to look at function. So I think it's good that this question come. And I think, I mean, from our point of view, we assess the intrinsic properties of also the non-chemical alternatives, if it's another material or another technology. So that's still our angle. But then, of course, there are other parameters that you need to look at if it's a non-chemical. So it's and that we neither have a specific process for that. But I think that we think more about, we have to take that on a case-to-case basis. But I would stress that I think that these kinds of solutions is very, very important going forward, because it's a very good step of sort of broadening the availability of alternatives.
All right, thanks a lot, both. Good. Then another question on downstream users. So why, as a downstream user, should I comment in the third-party consultations on alternatives to active substances? And more importantly, also, how can they be informed about it in the first place?
Yeah, I can comment on that. Yes, the participation of third parties in the consultations is really key, because in the process of active substance approval or renewal, when there is such a consultation on alternatives, we would like to have the more comprehensive information possible on the possible alternatives. So do they work? Do they won't work? We would like to have as specific information as possible for the authorities to make a decision on those. So this is really key to have this information. And people can be informed about that via consulting ECHA's website. These consultations are advertised there. And also, if they subscribe to the ECHA weekly news, this information is listed there as well. So I encourage very much the participation of stakeholders.
Thanks.
Maybe I can fill in on that one. I
Yes.
think from our point of view, I mean, the downstream users are extremely important, and they have a lot of information that's very, very important for consultations, because they have information on the viability of alternatives, which is what was extremely important. So I think I should stress that we really need more of that, and I think it's important, as we said with the previous question regarding downstream users, that they have a very, very important role, and sometimes it might be hard for them to see these consultations to understand should reply. So I would stress to everyone here who is listening that please do that, and as Denise said, follow the ECHA newsletter to get information. And from Chemsec side, we try to engage with companies in order to make them understand that replying to consultations is very, very important, and that's something we are working hard on. And of course, you can also follow us to get the information regarding what is ongoing regarding consultations.
All right, thanks a lot, Denis and Jonathan. Then the next question. So, due to the quote extreme interpretation given to the scope of the biocidal products regulation, alternatives and preventive measures fall under the scope of the regulation, and in brackets, its heavy approval path. And they argue that this fact kills the development of these alternatives. And they're asking whether there is any perspective to revise the scope of the BPR and give more room for these alternatives.
So probably I can chip in again here. Well, it's a bit related to one of the previous questions that we had. I mean, when we talk about biocidal active substances, of course, we have to be sure that they are assessed properly in details on a number of elements. They have to be efficacious, they have to be safe, of course, and so on. So there are a number of elements to look at carefully. So there needs to be an approval process which looks into that, which is indeed relatively heavy. But yes, nevertheless, there are options for bringing new substances, less hazardous substances. Stephanie mentioned already the Annex 1 inclusion there, which is with the less hazardous substances. So there are ways to do that. No, this potentially could be improved in future evolution of the legislation, but yeah, there is a balance to be struck between the proper assessment of the alternatives and not impeding even innovation at the same time. So this a balance to find, but not easy balance to find. Yeah.
Thank you, Denis. All right, let's move on. The next question is quite specific. Let's see if we can manage to answer it. The person would like to know which biocides can be used in food contact lubricants. I realize it is very specific, but it seems that we can't answer here on the spot. Denis, correct me if I'm wrong. This one we can come back to in the written Q&A. We'll ask around the building and get the right expertise and get back to you with an answer in that written Q&A.
Yes, thank you. Yes, for such specific questions, we will reply separately, yes.
All right. Then, so there can be many uses of an active substance. How can the supplier of these active substances take this diversity into account when analyzing their alternatives? Also considering that the supplier might not even be aware of all the uses. I would like to take this one. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is not an easy one. Of course, well, like we talked about before, engaging with downstream users is important. So I think that, well, you can use your own existing networks, well, perhaps where you do your sales, or perhaps on, I don't know, conventions where you visit, or perhaps do some market research on where everything is sold. But yeah, downstream users are an important factor in this. So it's not an easy one. I can understand that parties struggle with this.
Thank you, Bob. Anyone else would like to add to that?
Just, yeah, to reinforce Bob's message and what we said already before, the really importance of consulting the supply chain and getting feedback from the downstream users for getting a better knowledge on these uses. I mean, that's the basis if you want to make an analysis of alternatives and a substitution plan. I mean, you have to know the uses, and you have to fish for the information. That's clear.
All right, thank you.
Maybe I can also add something. Sorry.
Please, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the information on the use is then decisive on what kind of alternative you can choose. If you are looking from the perspective of a supplier, maybe who also is the manufacturer of the substance, then and he does not know anything about the end users, then it's quite hard to find anything else except a chemical alternative. So that's why the information of the downstream users and the users in the specific application and so on, the information is quite important then to kind of figure out what kind of alternative would then be even possible.
All right, thanks, Michaela. Okay, then the hazard profile of some potential alternatives is under re-evaluation by authorities. How can this be taken into account when doing an analysis of alternatives? It's under re-evaluation.
Yeah, maybe I can intervene in this. Yes, indeed, there are a number of substances which are under re-evaluation. So the regulatory status is a bit uncertain. The hazard profile is a bit uncertain in certain cases. So we advise that the entity performing the analysis of alternatives just take the latest authoritative information into account, noting that it can change in the future. Analysis of alternative is always a picture of the situation at the given moment. And this is taken into account further in the evaluation. It's always, yeah, these kind of scientific assessments are evaluative by nature.
Thank you, Denis. All right, I don't see anyone else wanting to jump in, so let's move on to the next one. This is about dialogue between companies specifically. So can ECHA actually help industry in establishing this dialogue between companies to search for and implement safer alternatives? Denis again?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So yes, we have done that in the past few years. ECHA was promoting via its substitution strategy stakeholders to organize what we call supply chain workshops to discuss substance-specific or use-specific substitution challenges. And a number of stakeholders organized those. And for example, here we have today the example of the Netherlands with the anti-fouling paints. They initiated this industry dialogue based on this initiative from ECHA, and we very welcome this. And this can come from authorities, institutions, but also, of course, industry associations or NGOs. ChemSec is doing this kind of thing as well. So we don't do that anymore in ECHA, but we really encourage stakeholders to pursue these initiatives, because we think it's really important that all people are brought together, and that the providers and the users are brought together also with other types of stakeholders which can provide funding maybe for testing, or or research bodies which can help also with more broader perspectives. So we really welcome these all stakeholders to put together their efforts in reaching a dialogue and solutions.
Yeah,
Thank
maybe
you.
I can fill in on the ChemSec side then, because then you mentioned us. I think I mean from ChemSec this is something that's very important, and I know that we cannot only rely on ECHA to form these collaborations, because it's a massive work. So I think from the NGO point of view, I mean we want to work with this as well. We work with this in several specific ways. And right now we're working a lot, for example, with other kinds of chemicals like PFAS, which is not maybe relevant in this area, but it's an example of where we can work together to find companies that want to work with this, and they can together talk about the safer alternatives, and they can talk about how to search and how to implement safer alternatives. So I think there are many ways of doing that, and apart from ECHA, and I think other authorities also have taken in initiatives around this. So there are many different ways to do this, but I agree sometimes it's a bit hard to find these and to understand how we can do that. So I think we need even more initiatives because it's very important. But from Chemsec side, we really try to support this and try to do it in several different areas. So we hope we'll see more of these examples in the future.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Bob, I see that you wanted to add something.
Yeah. Because this seems to be a question specific for a specific active substance. But what was really helpful, at least to us, the national government in the Netherlands, when the anti-fouling field test was performed, is that you learn also about how these innovations take place. And that is useful when you think about other kind of policies that you are making for chemical substances more broadly. Think about circular by design, think like issues about safe and sustainable by design. I mean, those are concepts that are being worked on quite a bit, quite extensively, both in Europe as in the Netherlands. And then a very practical field test can inform decisions that you want to make. So it's not only useful to companies, I would say, but also really useful to policymakers to have that dialogue going.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody else like to add something?
I only would like to support what the others have been saying. So we are all open ears, I think, also from sides of authorities to listen to substitution solutions and bring them forward. So that's why we at Bauer have this substitution support portal. And just activate, maybe you can also, the listeners today can activate the trade associations as well, then bring a specific topic to the attention of the national authorities or institutes helping with substitution, and then we can all engage in this dialogue on finding the right alternative.
Thanks a lot, Michaela. So yes, clearly dialogue is important for everyone, all actors in this process. Okay, then we can move on to a specific question to you, Stephanie. So does your institute intend to produce other guidance documents for assessing non-chemical alternatives for other types of use, so other than rodenticides?
Well, we are very open to do so because we think that the assessment of these non-chemical alternatives is a very important topic in the future. And what we will do is that we're starting a research project in this autumn on thermal alternatives to algicides, which are used in the open to remove algae from walkways, for example. So this will be our next project, but we're also very open for further proposals. However, of course, this is always a very big task, so we're also looking forward to other parties engaging in this topic and evaluating these alternatives.
All right, thanks a lot, Stephanie. Then about the process. So is an alternative assessment required at active substance approval or also at product authorization? Denny,
Yes,
perhaps?
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it's necessary at active substance approval level if the substance meets the substitution criteria. So yes, there is a need for analysis of alternatives there, and there is a consultation, stakeholder consultation, which is launched in this regard as well to collect further information on alternatives. So this is clearly there. But also for these substances, then there is an additional assessment of the alternative which takes place at the product stage, where authorities look at make a comparative assessment of the products. So yes, there are two stages there. So and that's why we emphasize today the importance of already getting information at the active substance stage, and that was the purpose of the guidance here on the analysis of alternatives for active substances. Yes, so there are different steps where this comes into play.
All right, thanks for clarifying that, Denis. Then biocides need to be registered, and the person is asking, the problem is basically when finding a non-hazardous replacement, then this compound is not necessarily registered and consequently is not being used, and what to do in this particular case. Anyone like to take that?
Well, on my side, I would just say that, I mean, if it's still a biocidal product, then of course it has to be authorized in the member state to be able to be used. So in that sense, the user would like to push the providers to have it authorized in the member state. But if it's not falling under the scope of the biocidal product regulation, then that's a different story. Yes. But,
All right. I see also from the nodding that everyone agrees, so we can move on to the next one. So product types. If you find an alternative that is not listed as product type 6 or product type 7 biocide in Belgium, the person is saying that they cannot use the product even though the product is less harmful. How can this type of problem be solved?
well, again, a bit same kind of question. I mean, if it's a biocidal product, then it has to be authorized. Yes, so you have to strive for getting this authorized if you want to use it. Let's see. I don't know if the others would like to complement that, but that would be my reply.
Thank you, Denis. All right. I don't see that others will be stepping in on this one, so we can move on to the next one. This one is for you, Jonathan. Can you clarify how the alternatives on the marketplace are assessed? Do you make a detailed chemical hazard assessment for each chemical or substituent?
So what we do is that we gather the information that we can get from the supplier regarding the hazardous properties, and then we do a check that towards our the requirements that we have or the criteria we have for a product to be fit for marketplace. And in some cases, of course, we cannot get all that information. We cannot get maybe all the constituents of a specific product, or maybe not all the information. And if we cannot get that, then since we don't have the resources to do a full chemical hazard assessment of all the different chemicals or different substances. So what we do then is that we put the responsibility on the companies, and they have to show and they have to verify to us that the product fulfill our criteria, and then we can put it on the marketplace. So in those cases, it's the companies that have to take the responsibility for showing telling us that they fulfill the criteria. So that's how we do. So we as Chemsec don't do the full chemical hazard assessment, but instead, when we cannot get the information in order to do that, we ask that from the company or put the responsibility on the companies.
All right, thanks a lot, Jonathan. Then we will jump from the marketplace to Subsport. And the question is, if I cannot find information on alternatives for my specific case, is there any help that can support me directly regarding substitution?
Yes, so it's possible that we have a contact form. So if there's any help necessary, you can contact us, Subsport Plus, and we can try to help you to redirect to the right resource, or to find the information if it's not findable in our databases or on our platform. Of course, if there's anything where we can improve our portal or website, so if there's information necessary and you pinpoint this need, then we also try to improve our website and include this information for the users. Yes.
All right, thanks a lot, Michaela. And actually, there's another one for you. So can you say what in-can preservatives have been looked at in the study that you mentioned? And could you shortly mention what was the outcome of the study workshop on in-can preservatives?
Yeah, so the study we did in 2020 was about mainly the isothiazolinones and formaldehyde releasers, actually, and was looking for alternatives which can substitute these substances in technical performance and so on. And there is also information, of course, then on the technical performance, but also on concentrations which have been used. But actually, it all came down that most of the isothiazolinones are replaced by other family members of the substance group, and other alternatives which have been used were, for example, non-chemical alternatives like dry paints and so on. So these are also discussed in the study. And if you're interested more in what have been researched and what was the outcome there, I would like to read up the, I would like to give you the link to the study which I mentioned in the presentation. Yeah.
All right, we can add that to the written Q&A actually as well to support that. Okay, then moving on to the guidance. So the new biocides guidance states that stakeholder involvement should take place outside of the applicant's supply chain as well as within. Can you further explain from a practical perspective what degree of consultation is expected outside the supply chain on potential alternatives?
I can say a few words on this. So indeed, in the guidance, we mentioned that the assessment should be tailored to the case, right? Because there are cases which are more complicated than others, depending on the number of uses and so on. So, but the overall idea is that, I mean, the manufacturer of the active substance should look not only its own supply chain, but also what is happening outside of it, right? So they can, for example, they can use also third parties to investigate what is on the market else than their own products. Try to contact these downstream users to see how they assess these alternatives and try to get this information into their assessment. So the overall idea is to have a picture which is as complete as possible, because in the past we've seen alternative assessments were really concentrated on their own supply chain, but it's important to get the views of also others which have experienced potentially other substances or other techniques which are important to get into the assessment. So that's the idea.
All right, thanks a lot, Denis. Okay, then we can move on to the next one. This is on anti-fouling. So how can users know what kind of anti-fouling they need? Bob, for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's always an individual case what kind of anti-fouling you need. In the campaign, we don't say which option you have to use, but we just present a range of options with all kinds of details. So environmental pressure, whether you need professional help applying the anti-fouling paint, things like that. And then you can make yourself an informed decision about what your preferred anti-fouling option is. So that's how our approach is.
Maybe I can add to that. In Germany, we do have like a map quite newly on our webpage where the fouling pressure for different waters in Germany is presented, so that you can have a look on how high the fouling pressure is for your marina, and you can choose an alternative that fits to this pressure. And I think that these informed decisions of the users are really key in the topic of substitution, and I think there can be done much more to support these users, because at the moment, like, proper use of biocidal product is only quite roughly described in Article 17, and I think we need an operationalization of this concept, like we do have for integrated pest management for plant protection products. There's nothing like this. What users can have a look at what they are supposed to do for proper use of biocidal products. So I think we need much more training and information possibilities for these users. And I think everyone has quite a long list what needs to be improved in the biocidal products regulation. But for us, this is certainly a topic that should be on this list as well.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie, also. All right, then moving on. When assessing the economic feasibility of an alternative, can a holistic approach also be used? That is, even if the 1-versus-1 price is the same, maybe there are different treatment costs, application costs, and the frequency of any treatment that is done. Is there anyone who wants to go first?
I can say something here. Yes, in the guidance of analysis alternatives, clearly the economic feasibility is not restricted to just the price tag of the alternative, right? You have to look at the overall cost of the use of the alternatives compared to the substance that you would like to substitute. So indeed, it contains different elements that you have to take into account. And I think Bob mentioned that in his presentation, they looked at the overall cost over a year or so, or over several years of using the alternatives. And this is the perspective which should be taken indeed here.
Thank you, Denis. Is there anyone who wants to add? No? All right, good. Just conscious of time, I think we have time for just one more question, and then we'll close the webinar. Just a second. There we go. So, to Bob, would the RIVM initiate a similar practical testing of alternatives on other uses, or would it be left now to industry actors themselves?
I mean, that's a difficult question to answer. The RIVM is not here. I cannot speak for the RIVM, which is the Dutch National Assessment Agency for the Environment and Public Health. So I honestly cannot answer that question, what the RIVM can or should do. I do believe that industry has also a certain responsibility themselves to find alternatives. But yeah, who knows what the future is going to bring.
All right, thanks a lot, Bob. Actually, maybe we can squeeze one more in. So this one is on any significant case studies on public health disinfectants. So do these kinds of case studies exist? For example, water biocides, true alternatives, and effective, available in sufficient quantities and cost effective. Are we thinking big enough, the person asks. So the large scale management of water for huge infrastructure, boat fouling, according to them, is very small in scope.
Well, there's one project, it's been quite a while now, but there was one on chemical disinfectants leasing in hospitals in Germany, conducted by the Deutsche Bundesstiftung Umwelt, which was not so much on alternatives, but also on preventive measures and an effective use of disinfectants, which also fits in this topic, I think.
Thank you, Stephanie. Just checking if anyone still wants to add something, but if not, then yes, we only have a couple of minutes left, so it's time to end the webinar. Thank you to our participants for joining us today and for sending us your questions. Many thanks also to our panelists for sharing your insights into assessing alternatives for biocides. Now, as said at the start and throughout the Q&A, you can find answers to all the questions from today in the published Q&A document that will be coming as soon as possible after the event. The best way to get notified about the document when it's published, and also to stay up to date with our news and the consultations that Denis mentioned earlier, is by subscribing to our weekly newsletter. And you can do that at echa.europa.eu/subscribe. So with that, I would like to thank everyone once more. Goodbye.